Have you ever entered a war that you knew you were doomed to lose? Maybe in a job, maybe in a relationship, maybe just with yourself. And at that moment, did you ask yourself, why am I continuing? Why don't I give up? 148 years ago, a man answered this question in the most dramatic way. Saigo Takamori, one of Japan's greatest heroes, and at the same time, one of its greatest tragic figures. He saved an empire, then he betrayed it, or so they said. But is that true? Was Saigo really a traitor, or was the real betrayal committed against him? I will tell you this story, but let me warn you, this is not a comfortable story. There is no black and white here, only thousands of shades of gray. There are no good guys and bad guys here, only people fighting for their beliefs. And there is no happy ending here, only the price a man pays for staying true to himself. So why am I telling you this story? Because maybe one day you too will have to make this choice. Your principles or practicality, your heart or your mind. And when that day comes, Saigo's story will whisper something to you. Are you ready? Then let us begin. The year is 1828, winter season, a poor neighborhood of Kagoshima, and the birth of a baby. The year is 1828, winter season. In a poor neighborhood of Kagoshima, in a small house, a child was born. His name was Saigo Kokichi. Later, the world would know him as Saigo Takamori. On the night he was born, a storm was raging outside. The wind was shaking the roof. Rain was pounding against the windows. And inside the house, the cries of a woman were rising. Saigo's mother was in labor. The midwife was by her side. The father was waiting outside. He was rubbing his hands together, reciting prayers. And finally, the cry of a baby was heard. The midwife came out. "You have a son," she said. The father rushed inside. He looked at the baby, a small, reddened, screaming creature. But in that scream there was strength, a determination. "This child," said the father, "will become a great man." At that moment, no one could have known how true those words would be. Saigo was the child of a poor family. His father, Saigo Kichibei, was a low-ranking samurai. His salary was small. His living conditions were harsh. Their home was a small hut, 3 rooms, paper walls, an earthen floor, cold in winter, hot in summer, but still, it was a home. Saigo grew up here, together with his siblings. There were 7 of them in total, and they all shared the same room. Food was usually rice and vegetables. Fish was considered a luxury, meat only once or twice a year. But Saigo did not complain, because he did not know that another kind of life existed. The most distinctive feature of his childhood was his physical strength. Saigo was larger than his peers, stronger, more resilient. The other children in the village liked to wrestle with him, but they always lost, because Saigo was like a bull. Once he grabbed you, no one could escape. Once he had a match with the strongest boy in the village. The boy was 3 years older than Saigo, but he still lost. People were astonished. "This child is not normal," they said. "Perhaps he will become a warrior." But Saigo's strength was not only physical. His mind was sharp, and his heart was large. Every evening, his father would tell him stories of old samurai, about honor, loyalty, courage. "A samurai," his father would say, "never lies, never breaks his word, and never crushes the weak." Saigo listened to these words and etched them into his mind, and throughout his life he remained loyal to these principles. When he turned 10, Saigo was sent to school, but this was not an ordinary school. It was a special school for the children of samurai. At the school they taught swordsmanship, they taught archery, and most importantly, they taught Confucian philosophy. His teacher was an elderly samurai. His name was Yokoyama Yasutake. He was a strict, disciplined, but fair man. When Yokoyama first saw Saigo, he understood that he was different. "This child," he said to himself, "has extraordinary potential," and he gave him special attention. Saigo was successful at school, especially in swordsmanship, but he stood out not only for his technique, but also for his strategy. One day, Yokoyama asked him, "Saigo, what is the most important thing in battle?" Saigo thought. Then he answered, "Is it strength, sensei?" Yokoyama shook his head. "No." "Is it speed?" "No." Saigo was surprised. "Then what is it?" Yokoyama smiled. "The mind. If you can control the mind, you can control the body. And if you can understand your enemy's mind, you can defeat him." This lesson changed Saigo's life. But Saigo's life was not made up of education alone. There were family troubles as well. His father had fallen ill, tuberculosis. At the time, it was a deadly disease. There was no treatment. Every time his father coughed, Saigo's heart ached. Every night he prayed for him, but the prayers did not work. One winter day, his father died. Saigo was 18 years old. At the funeral, Saigo did not cry. He just stood silently, and inside he made a vow. "Father, I will be a son worthy of you."
After his father's death, Saigo had to support the family because he was now the eldest man in the household. He found a job. He became a low-level clerk in the administration of the Satsuma clan. The salary was small, the work was boring, but there was no other choice. He worked during the day and took care of his family at night, his mother, his siblings, everyone. And in his spare time, he continued to read Confucius, Mencius, Sun Tzu. He learned from the ancient masters. But in truth, something was boiling inside Saigo, a restlessness, a search. "Did I come into this world just to do paperwork?" he asked himself. "Or do I have a greater purpose?" He found the answer a few years later. In the 1850s, Japan was on the brink of a great transformation. For 200 years, the country had been closed. Foreigners and foreign trade were forbidden. But now, this was changing. In 1853, American Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Tokyo Bay with warships, and he demanded Japan must open its doors to trade. The shogun, the military leader of Japan, did not know what to do. Perry's ships were powerful. Japan's navy, on the other hand, was old and weak. And in 1854, a treaty was signed. Japan opened itself to the world. But not everyone was pleased. When Saigo heard about these developments, he became angry. "The shogun has betrayed Japan," he said. "He bowed to foreigners." Many samurai around him shared the same opinion, and a movement began. Sono Joi, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. This movement was against the shogunate, and Saigo joined it. But this was a dangerous decision because the shogunate did not forgive rebels. Saigo attended secret meetings, plans were made, plots were formed, and one day, everything exploded. In 1858, the shogunate carried out a crackdown. They arrested the rebels and executed some of them. Saigo barely escaped, but his leader, Nariakira Shimazu, passed away, and Saigo found himself completely alone.
At that time, Saigo made a decision to go into exile. He exiled himself to a distant island. It was a tropical island called Amami Oshima in the southwest of Japan. There he lived a simple life. He fished, planted rice, and he thought. Maybe, he said to himself, I am on the wrong path. Maybe fighting against the shogunate is not right. But deep inside, he still believed Japan had to change. He spent 3 years in exile, and those 3 years matured him. On the island, he met the local people, simple people, fishermen, farmers, weavers. Their lives were hard, but they were happy. Saigo learned a great deal from them, especially one thing. Happiness is not in wealth, but in peace. And he met a woman. Her name was Aikana, a local woman, beautiful, gentle, strong. The two fell in love, and they got married. For the first time in his life, Saigo found true peace. But this peace did not last long. In 1864, a message came from the Satsuma clan. Saigo, return to Tokyo. We need you. Saigo hesitated. On one side, there was his family. On the other, his duty. Aikana looked at him and said, Go, because you were born for great things. And Saigo said farewell with tears in his eyes. He left the island and returned to Tokyo. When he arrived in Tokyo, everything was chaotic. The shogunate was weakening, the rebels were growing stronger, and the country was on the brink of a civil war. Saigo met with one of the leaders of the Satsuma clan. His name was Okubo Toshimichi. He was a sharp, intelligent, ambitious man. Okubo said to Saigo, We will overthrow the shogunate and restore the emperor to power. You should join us. Saigo thought. It was a risky plan, but at the same time, it was right. I accept, he said. And the foundations of the Meiji Restoration were laid.
In 1866, Saigo developed a strategy. He formed an alliance between the Satsuma clan and the Choshu clan. 2 powerful clans came together. This was a historic event because these 2 clans had been enemies for years, but Saigo brought them together. How? Through diplomacy, persuasion, and charisma. People admired him. This man is not just a warrior, they said. He is a leader. In 1868, the Boshin War began. Imperial forces fought against the shogunate. Saigo was one of the commanders of the army. He devised strategies, won battles, and within a year, the shogunate fell. Emperor Meiji ascended the throne, and a new era began, the Meiji era. Saigo was a hero. The people saluted him. The emperor thanked him. And Saigo took a high position in Tokyo. Advisor, commander, diplomat. They were the brightest days of his life. But success is not always permanent. As the years passed, Saigo began to fall into disagreement with the government, especially on one issue,
the future of the samurai. The government wanted to abolish the samurai class because for modernization, the old systems had to be dismantled. But Saigo was against this. "The samurai are the soul of Japan," he said. "If you destroy them, Japan will lose its soul as well." Okubo, his friend, opposed him. "Saigo, you're living in the past. The world is changing, and we must change too." The two old friends became enemies. In 1873, another disagreement arose: Korea policy. Saigo wanted to launch a military expedition to Korea because Korea had disrespected Japan. But the government rejected this. "We are not ready yet," they said. "First, we must strengthen the country." Saigo became angry. "You are cowards," he said. "You are not protecting Japan's honor." And he resigned. He left Tokyo. He returned to his hometown, Kagoshima, and there he waited in silence.
But what he was waiting for was not peace, it was war. Because Saigo knew, sooner or later, the government would come for him. And when that time came, he would have to fight. And indeed, in 1877, war came. Imagine Saigo's mind in those days. A man who once saved Japan, now a man fighting against Japan. What was he feeling? Regret? Anger? Or just exhaustion? Perhaps all of them at once. One night, a few days before the battle, Saigo sat in his garden. He looked up at the sky. The stars were shining, and he asked himself, "Am I doing the right thing?" No answer came. But Saigo already knew the answer, because throughout his life he had always followed the same principle: fight for what you believe is right, no matter the outcome. And he fought. And this brings us back to Shiroyama Hill, September 21st, 1877, the final battle, the final breath. Saigo's life was like a circle. He was born in a poor house. He took part in wars. He witnessed victories. He experienced defeats. And in the end, he returned to where he was born, to Kagoshima. And there he died. But his death was not an end. It was a beginning. Because Saigo Takamori was not just a man. He was an idea, a principle, a symbol. And symbols never die. 1 week after Saigo Takamori's death, something strange happened in Tokyo. The streets grew quiet. People began to speak in whispers. And in the windows of some houses, candles were secretly lit. The government noticed this and grew concerned, because those candles were burning for something: the memory of Saigo. When Prime Minister Okubo Toshimichi, Saigo's former friend and later enemy, read the reports, he let out a deep sigh. "We killed him," he said, "but I think we made him even stronger." And he was right. Because Saigo's death transformed him from a man into a legend. In the early days, the government banned talking about him. His name did not appear in newspapers. He was not taught in schools. In official records, he was referred to only as a rebel. But the people did not forget him. In secret, the stories were told in coffee houses, tea houses, village squares. Saigo Takamori was a true samurai, they said. He was Japan's last honorable man. And slowly, these stories grew, changed, and became legend. Some began to say that Saigo had not actually died. He only went into hiding, they said.
One day he will return and he will save Japan. Of course, this was nonsense, but people wanted to believe it, because Saigo was not just a man to them, he was hope. In 1880, Okubo Toshimichi was killed, an assassination, by one of Saigo's former followers. When the assassin was captured, he said this, "Okubo killed Saigo, and I took revenge." The government was shocked and realized Saigo's influence was still very strong. Emperor Meiji convened a meeting. He asked his advisors, "How do we solve the Saigo problem?" One advisor suggested, "Your Majesty, perhaps we should pardon him. That way the people will be relieved." Another advisor objected, "But he was a rebel. If we pardon him, others may rebel as well." The emperor thought for a long time. Then he decided, "Let us pardon him, but only after his death. That way we calm the people and we preserve our authority." And in 1889, Saigo was officially pardoned, 12 years later. The news spread throughout Japan. People poured into the streets. Celebrations were held, and in Kagoshima, thousands of people flocked to Saigo's grave. An old man wept in front of the grave. "At last," he said, "at last, justice has been done." But could Saigo's spirit hear this pardon? No one could know. After the pardon, official books about Saigo began to be written. The first biography was published in 1890. In the book, Saigo was portrayed as a hero. But interestingly, some details had been changed. For example, his real disagreements with the government were softened. A historian objected to this. "This is a distortion of the truth," he said. But the government responded, "We want to unite the people. If we portray Saigo only as a rebel, we divide the country. But if we portray him as a hero, we unite the country." And thus, Saigo's official image was created. A loyal, brave, idealistic samurai. He made mistakes, but he was well-intentioned. In 1898, a statue of Saigo was erected in the center of Tokyo, in Ueno Park. At the unveiling ceremony, thousands of people gathered. Even the emperor came, and he gave a speech. Saigo Takamori was a son of Japan. He made mistakes, but he also loved his country. And today we remember him, not only as a soldier, but also as a patriot. The people applauded, and they looked at the statue. But in the statue, Saigo was not wearing armor. He had no sword. He wore only a simple kimono, and beside him a dog. People were surprised. Is this a statue of a warrior? But perhaps this was more fitting, because Saigo was not just a warrior, he was also a human being. At the beginning of the 20th century, Japan grew stronger rapidly. It defeated Russia, occupied Korea, and went to war with China. And during this process, Saigo's legacy was used in different ways. Militarists pointed to him as an example. Saigo was a brave warrior, they said. We must be like him. But pacifists looked at him differently. Saigo entered an unnecessary war, they said, and he lost. This should be a lesson for us. War is not the solution. Two groups interpreted the same man in completely different ways. In the 1930s, when Japan drifted toward fascism, Saigo became popular again. In military schools, his story was taught. Saigo Takamori was loyal to his emperor, it was said. He fought to the death. You should be like this too. Young soldiers listened to these stories, and many of them wanted to be like Saigo. But they did not know Saigo's real story. They only knew that he was a warrior. They did not know that he was also a thinker, a poet, a human being. In 1945, when World War II ended, Japan was devastated. Atomic bombs had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The emperor had surrendered. And after the war, the Japanese asked themselves, how did we come to this point? Some blame Saigo. Militarist heroes like him led us into war. But others defended him. No, Saigo was a peaceful man. He was simply misunderstood. The debate lasted for years. But interestingly, in post-war Japan, Saigo became popular again, but this time in a different way. People saw him as a symbol of resistance. They said, Saigo fought against a great power, and he lost, but he never surrendered. This is an example of courage. And the new generation rediscovered Saigo. In the 1960s, a Japanese writer wrote a novel about Saigo. It was titled Yoake Mae, Before the Dawn. The novel told Saigo's life in a romantic way, his love, his wars, his losses. The book sold 1 million copies, and Saigo was back in the spotlight. A critic wrote, Saigo is reinterpreted by every generation because he has a universal character, idealistic, tragic, and humane. In the 1970s, a Japanese director made a film about Saigo. It was called The Last Samurai. The film depicted Saigo's final days, that last battle on Shiroyama Hill, that dramatic death. The film broke box office records, and it won awards at international festivals. A critic wrote, "This film is not just a historical drama, it is also a meditation on the cost of modernization." In the 1980s, an American writer wrote a biography about Saigo, in English. In the book, Saigo's life was introduced to Western readers, and many Americans heard of him for the first time. One reader wrote about the book, Saigo is like Japan's Abraham Lincoln, a leader, a hero, a tragedy. In the 1990s, a Japanese company created a brand using Saigo's name. It was called Saigo Sake. The company used Saigo's image in its advertisements. The true samurai spirit, they said, in this sake. Some people saw this as commercialization, disrespect to Saigo's memory, they said. But others defended it. This is a way of keeping Saigo's legacy alive. In the 2000s, an American film company made a movie called The Last Samurai. Tom Cruise starred in it. The film was inspired by Saigo, but the story was entirely fictional. An American soldier comes to Japan and joins the samurai. The film was a huge success. Millions of people watched it. But some Japanese criticized the film. This is not Saigo's real story, they said. Hollywood changed everything. Still, the film introduced Saigo to the world, and many people began to research the real Saigo. But Saigo's greatest legacy may not be physical, but intellectual. Because Saigo asked a question, what should a person live for, and what should they die for? This question is universal. In every culture, in every age, people ask it. And Saigo's answer was, for what you believe in. Imagine asking this question in your own life today. What do you live for? What would you fight for? Maybe a career, maybe a family, maybe an ideal. But whatever it is, Saigo reminds us of one thing. If there is something you believe in, stay true to it, no matter the outcome. In the 2010s, a survey was conducted in Japan. Who is your favorite Japanese figure in history? Saigo Takamori made it into the top 5. Centuries later, he was still loved. A young woman who participated in the survey said this: "Saigo gives me courage because he fought even knowing he would lose, and that is true courage." In the 2020s, during the COVID-19 pandemic, some Japanese people remembered Saigo. Saigo did not give up in difficult times, they said. We will not give up either. And in Kagoshima, visits to Saigo's grave increased. People prayed to him, they asked for strength, they sought hope. Today, in 2025, Saigo's legacy is still alive. In Kagoshima, a festival is held every year. It is called Saigo Matsuri. Traditional clothes are worn, sword demonstrations are performed, and stories are told. And on Shiroyama Hill, the monument of that final battle still stands. Every September 24, a ceremony is held. Candles are lit, flowers are laid. But perhaps Saigo's greatest legacy is in people's minds, because Saigo is not just a historical figure, he is also an archetype, an idealistic, tragic hero. Every culture has such characters: King Arthur, Che Guevara, Joan of Arc. They lost, but they were never forgotten, because they represent one thing: there are things more important than winning. And Saigo's story teaches us one more thing. History is not written only by the winners. At first, Saigo was seen as a rebel, but over time he became a hero because the people embraced him. They told his story, preserved his values, and thus Saigo did not die. He continued to live. One night in Kagoshima, an old man went to his granddaughter's wedding. There was dancing, songs were sung, and at one point the old man told his granddaughter the story of Saigo. "My child," he said, "do you know Saigo?" The young girl nodded. "Yes, grandfather, we learned about him at school." "And what do you think about him?" The girl thought. Then she said, "I think he lost, but still he is remembered like a winner." The old man smiled. "Yes, because sometimes losing is also a victory." And perhaps this is Saigo's greatest lesson. Life is not measured only by winning. Some people win everything throughout their lives, but they are never remembered. Some people lose everything, but they are never forgotten. Saigo was in the second category. On Shiroyama Hill, 148 years after that final battle, there is still a silence. The wind passes through the trees, leaves rustle, and in the distance, a faint smoke rises from Sakurajima volcano. At the top of the hill, there is a monument, a simple stone monument. Saigo's name is written on it. And every year, thousands of people come here. They visit, they pray, they remember. Because Saigo is not only a past, he is also a future. A teacher took his students to Shiroyama Hill. They gathered in front of the monument. The teacher asked, "Children, what does Saigo teach you?" One child said, courage. Another child said, loyalty. Another said, hope. The teacher smiled. You are all right, but I think Saigo teaches us the most important thing: staying true to oneself. And perhaps this message is still valid in the 21st century, because today's world is changing rapidly. Technology advances, cultures blend, values transform. And within this change, people sometimes get lost. They ask, who am I? What do I believe in? Saigo's story offers an answer to these questions. Know who you are and stay true to it.
On Shiroyama Hill, on an evening in the year 2025, the sun was setting. Golden light filtered through the trees, struck the stone monument, and covered the old battlefield with a soft veil. And on the hill, a lone man was standing, middle-aged, wearing a suit. He had come from Tokyo. He had quit his job, taken the train to Kagoshima, and climbed up here. Why? He himself did not fully know. Perhaps he was searching for something, perhaps an answer, perhaps just some peace. He stood in front of the monument. He read the name Saigo Takamori, and he looked at it silently for a long time. Who were you? The man asked quietly. Were you really a hero, or just a stubborn idealist? No answer came. Only the wind rustled the leaves. But the man felt something inside himself, an understanding, a connection. Maybe, he said to himself, you were just a human being, someone who made mistakes, who fell, but who never gave up. And in that moment, he realized something. Maybe I am like that too. Because Saigo's story is not only the story of Japan, it is also the story of humanity. In every culture, in every age, there have been people like Saigo. People who fought for ideals, who resisted even knowing they would lose, who stood alone but never surrendered. They are sometimes called heroes in history books and sometimes madmen, but they all share one truth. They pursued something, and that gave their lives meaning. How should we view this in the modern world? Today, in the 21st century, can there be someone like Saigo? Someone who fights alone, desperately, against a great power? The answer, yes. Every day, in different parts of the world, there are people like this. An activist fights against environmental pollution, alone but determined. A journalist exposes corruption, receives threats but does not give up. A teacher educates children in a poor village, no resources, no support, but does not quit. They are the Saigos of modern times. But Saigo's story is also a warning, because Saigo lost. And while losing, thousands of people were also lost. What does this teach us? Is idealism not always right? Or is idealism always necessary? Perhaps both are true. Imagine Saigo's decision in 1873. What was he feeling as he left Tokyo? Perhaps freedom. I no longer have to deal with the games of politicians. Perhaps disappointment. I made a revolution together with these men, but they changed. Perhaps fear. Am I making a mistake? Maybe if I stayed in Tokyo, I could make more change. But Saigo left anyway, because he could not accept compromise. And this is where the debate begins. Compromise or principle? Some say Saigo should have compromised. He should have stayed in the government and tried to change things from within.
That way, perhaps the War of 1877 would never have happened. Others say no, Saigo remained loyal to his principles. If he had compromised, he would have betrayed the samurai. Which is right? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. Because life is not black and white, life is gray. But Saigo did not accept gray. He chose black or white, and this made him both great and tragic. If Saigo had been more pragmatic, perhaps he would have been more successful. Perhaps he could have saved the samurai gradually. Perhaps he could have made Japan's modernization gentler. But then, Saigo would not have become a legend. He would have been just a politician. And the world would have lost a legend. So what does this mean for us? In our own lives, we also face the dilemma of compromise versus principle. At work, you receive an unethical instruction. What do you do? Do you compromise or do you resign? In a relationship, your values conflict. What do you do? Do you adapt or do you leave? In a society, you witness injustice. What do you do? Do you remain silent or do you speak out? Saigo's answer is clear. Stay loyal to your principles. But the modern world says, this is not always practical, and perhaps true wisdom is balancing the two. Saigo's mistake may have been pure idealism. Perhaps if he had added a bit of pragmatism, he could have created more change. But at the same time, Saigo's strength was also pure idealism, because he reminded people of something. Some things are non-negotiable. A philosopher once said, Saigo did not fight to win, he fought in order to fight. This may seem illogical, but in fact there is a deep truth in it, because some battles are not fought to win, but to defend what is right. Martin Luther King Jr. fought against racism, and he was assassinated. Did he lose? No, because his movement continued. Mahatma Gandhi fought against colonialism, and he was assassinated. Did he lose? No, because India gained its freedom. Saigo Takamori fought against the soullessness of modernization, and he died. Did he lose? Maybe yes, maybe no, because his message is still alive. Now, in 2025, in Kagoshima, that lonely man is standing in front of the monument. He takes a notebook out of his pocket, a pen, and he begins to write. Today I visited the monument of Saigo Takamori, and I realized something. I am fighting a battle too, at work, in life, with myself. And sometimes I lose, sometimes I get tired, sometimes I want to give up. But Saigo reminded me of something. What matters is not winning, what matters is continuing to fight. The man puts down the pen, looks at the monument one last time, and smiles. Thank you, Saigo, he says quietly. You died hundreds of years ago, but today you taught me how to live. And he begins to walk down the hill. His steps are more determined, his gaze clearer, because he has found something, meaning. And this is Saigo's true legacy. He gives people meaning. He gives courage to a student. Even if you fail an exam, do not give up. He gives honor to a worker. Even if your job is hard, work honestly. He gives peace to an old person. If you lived your life rightly, death is not frightening. But there is also an irony in Saigo's story. He fought against modernization, yet today he is a symbol of modernization. Because Japan modernized, but at the same time it preserved Saigo. And this shows something. A society can both move forward and remember its past. On the streets of Kagoshima, A young girl is walking with her father. The father is telling her about Saigo. "Dad," the girl says, "was Saigo a bad man because he fought against the government?" The father smiles. "No, my daughter. He was a good man, but he made a difficult decision." "Was that decision right?" The father stops, thinks. "I don't know, my daughter. Maybe yes, maybe no. But what matters is this: he fought for what he believed in, and that is always right." And perhaps this is the most beautiful lesson. In life, there is not always a correct answer. Sometimes you have to choose between two wrongs. Sometimes you enter a battle that cannot be won. Sometimes the whole world is against you. But still, what you must do is this: stand for what you believe in. Saigo did that, and perhaps that is why he is still remembered. Because the world is full of winners, but souls are full of ideals, and Saigo was a soul. When night falls, Shiroyama Hill becomes quiet. Visitors leave, the lights go out. But the monument is still there, in the darkness, alone, but solid. And the moon rises in the sky, illuminating the hill, as if Saigo's spirit is still there, on the hill, waiting. What is he waiting for? No one knows. Perhaps the next generation. Perhaps the next Saigo.
Because the world will always need Saigos, idealists, those who resist, those who lose but never surrender. They balance society. They remind us winning is not everything. And one day, perhaps, another Saigo will be born. Perhaps in Japan, perhaps in another country. Perhaps he too will fight against a great power. Perhaps he too will move forward knowing he will lose. And perhaps he too will be remembered for centuries. Because some people do not die, they only transform. Now we have reached the end of our story, but in fact, this is not an end. Because Saigo's story is retold in every generation. With each telling, it changes a little, it grows a little. And perhaps the Saigo in your mind now is one of thousands of different Saigos. Perhaps your Saigo is a hero, perhaps a tragedy, perhaps a lesson. But whatever he is now a part of you. And perhaps one day you too will face a difficult decision. Perhaps at work, perhaps in your family, perhaps in your life. And on that day, perhaps you will remember Saigo. You will ask, what would he do? And perhaps you will find the answer. Saigo Takamori was born in 1828. He died in 1777. He lived only 49 years, but those 49 years were worth centuries, because he did not just live a life, he left a legacy. And now, in the darkness of the night, on Shiroyama Hill, the wind is blowing. Leaves are swirling. The earth smells rich, and in the distance, the sound of the sea is heard. Saigo's grave is still there, a simple stone grave, but it is surrounded by flowers, fresh flowers. Every day someone brings new ones. Because Saigo did not die, he is still alive, in the hearts of the people, in history books, and in every soul inspired by him. One last time, let us climb the hill. Let us stand in front of the monument. Let us close our eyes.
and take a deep breath. Feel it, that ancient battle, those final cries, that tragic end. But at the same time, feel this, that eternal spirit, that unending courage, that everlasting message. And open your eyes. The sun is rising again, a new day is beginning, and Saigo's spirit rises with this sun, because every new day is a new chance, a new battle, a new hope. And Saigo whispers to us, even if you lose, fight. Even if you stand alone, stand. Even if you die, live. Because life is not for the winners, life is for the fighters. And will you fight? The end. Epilogue, 150 years later. In 2027, the Japanese government made a decision. The 200th anniversary of Saigo Takamori's birth would be celebrated. Events were organized across the country, exhibitions were opened, films were made, books were written. And on Shiroyama Hill, a grand memorial ceremony was held. The Prime Minister gave a speech. Saigo Takamori is a symbol of Japan. He showed us this: a person is measured not by how long he lives, but how he lives. And today, 200 years later, we remember him, not only as a samurai, but also as a teacher. Thousands of people applauded. And that day, something happened in Kagoshima. A bird flew across the sky, alone, freely. People looked at it and smiled, because perhaps that bird was Saigo's spirit, still free, still flying. And the story ends like this, but at the same time, it begins like this, because every ending is a new beginning, and Saigo's story will never end. Because some people do not die, they only become legends, and legends are eternal.